Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update on social media. Thank you as always for joining us this week. So much going on. First though, the Supreme Court has ruled in a series of cases that are important in big ways. And most importantly, I think of the rulings this week, is a ruling curtailing the power of the out-of-control courts. The court ruled 6-3 in a big decision written by Amy Coney Barrett, the Associate Justice appointed by President Trump, that the federal courts have no authority, generally speaking, to issue the types of nationwide so-called universal injunctions they've been issuing, mostly against President Trump to curtail his agenda that he's trying to implement as he sees fit under law and in accordance with the wishes of the voting public that put him in power. It's a respect for the separation of powers, that judges can't run the executive branch. It's a respect for the rights of voters to select those who are actually going to run the executive branch, the president. We didn't vote for the judges to run the country. We voted for the president. And so, as the justice highlights in her decision, it's one thing to not like an imperial presidency, but the answer isn't an imperial judiciary. And this is a major blow to the judicial coup, and I can't highlight or overstate. I guess I could overstate it, right? It would be difficult to overstate how important the decision is. And if you go, and I encourage you to go, as I've said before, and read these decisions, because they, generally speaking, are accessible to individuals who aren't lawyers. I'm not a lawyer. I've read a lot of Supreme Court decisions, so I kind of know what to look for in terms of material that's interesting, but it's usually accessible to laymen. And this decision is about how we govern ourselves. And if you're a patriot, you're going to want to read it and read the dissents. You may find something persuasive there. I find the dissents often make interesting points worth thinking about and considering. And if not, they're not always persuasive. Rarely are they in terms of the liberals' writing. But if they're done well and they're being good lawyers and judges, or justices in this case, they're worth considering. And Amy Coney Barrett essentially on, let's see, what page is it? Do it down here. They let me have the computer today, so bear with me as I move along and find the page, unless they can do it separately back there. I think I got it here. So at the end of her decision, I'll just read it because it's brief enough. You don't need to see it. Now, she basically summarizes the case. They found there's a law. Believe it or not, there's a law that governs the judiciary. They're not lawless. They've got the Constitution, obviously. But the law that really established the courts, the judiciary law of 1789. And she essentially finds that, and she's joined by 5 other justices, it was a 6-3 decision, that law established the courts, but also their ability to provide relief, or as they call it, equities. I think I'm fairly construing it. And what Justice Barrett and her colleagues say is, look, when we developed courts in this country, the understanding was the relief they could grant was limited by the Constitution and by the practice at the time, especially in the courts of England, namely the main court in England, the Court of Chancery. And the relief could be complete for the plaintiff, meaning someone could sue and the court could, within reason, grant complete relief, but they couldn't grant relief to parties who weren't before the court. And that's the problem. The left is suing in court, suing in jurisdictions that are likely to be friendly to them. The bulk of all these universal injunctions have come from a small minority of liberal court districts in the country. I think Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, highlighted that, 25 of whatever, the 35 of them have come from 5 districts full of liberal judges. And those judges purport to run our nation's government, practically speaking, by curtailing the powers of the president at the request of one party, a very limited number of people. And that's not the way the courts are supposed to work. We have courts that have jurisdictions across the country for only the people or the parties that live in those jurisdictions. So if I live in New York and Tom Fitton goes and sues the federal government and I say, President Trump can't deport me, they can't say, well, not only can President Trump not deport you, Tom, but he can't deport everyone else in the country similarly situated. That's not the way it works. You don't get to shut the entire policy of a national government down through one district court judge. Arguably, the Supreme Court could do that. Of course, the Supreme Court's established by the Constitution. And even then, they have limits as to how far they're able to go in terms of granting relief. So that's kind of my somewhat confused way of describing the issue to you. The question is, should one judge have the power to tell President Trump, at the request of one plaintiff, in theory, one plaintiff, one person, that he can't, for instance, deport anyone back to Venezuela or to a third country? It doesn't matter. Just the scope of authority these courts have exercised go into all areas of the executive function of the presidency, from the military to foreign policy, tariffs, hiring and firing, curtailing waste, fraud, and abuse, foreign policy generally. Incredible. Federal courts, and this is how she concludes the argument, federal courts do not exercise general oversight of the executive branch. They resolve cases and controversies consistent with the authority Congress has given them. And again, that's in the Judiciary Act of 1789. When a court concludes that the executive branch has acted unlawfully, the answer is not for the court to exceed its power to. And I'm going to read another section of the decision as well. And it's on page 22 of the opinion. And I encourage you to go read it because it really highlights, it's extraordinary. Because she calls out Justice Barrett on behalf of her colleagues, one other judge by name, one other justice, Justice Jackson, who issued a dissent that just horrified her colleagues. And I've been reading Supreme Court cases all my adult life. I'm generally familiar with the big cases out there as a result of my work at Judicial Watch. I can't recall, and I'm sure the scholars out there, the constitutional scholars, will probably have something similar they can point to, but if they can, I'd be interested to see it because it would be extraordinary too. Such a strong denouncement and you won't believe how strong the justice denounced what Jackson wrote. You just won't believe it. So there were two dissents. There was Justice Jackson's dissent and a dissent by Justice Sotomayor and Justice Kagan. And I think, let's see, Justice Sotomayor filed a dissenting opinion, which Justice Kagan and Justice Jackson joined, and then Justice Jackson wrote her own dissent as well. And her dissent is called out. And the reason it's so important is because what Justice Jackson did kind of lifts the veil in terms of what the left wants the courts to do. They want the courts to basically rule over us, contrary to the Constitution. Let me go back to the page. Forgive me. I'm so excited to read it, I basically put it down without looking at it. The principal dissent focuses on conventional terrain, just like the Judiciary Act of 1789 and our cases in equity, which is, let's see, I'll bring it up. There you go. You can see it right there, right? Part C. That may be too small for you to see. But then she tears into Justice Jackson. Justice Jackson, however, chooses a startling line of attack that is tethered neither to these sources nor, frankly, to any doctrine whatsoever, waving away attention to the limits on judicial power as, quote, a mind-numbingly technical query. She offers a vision of the judicial role that would make even the most ardent defender of judicial supremacy blush. In her telling, the fundamental role of the courts is to order everyone, including the executive, to follow the law, full stop. I'm going to skip over some parenthetical comments. And she warns, if courts lack the power to require the executive to adhere to law universally, courts will leave a gash in the basic tenets of our founding charter that could turn out to be a mortal wound. Rhetoric aside, Justice Jackson's position is difficult to pin down. She might be arguing that universal injunctions are appropriate, even required, whenever the defendant is part of the executive branch. If so, her position goes far beyond the mainstream defense of universal injunctions. As best we can tell, though, her argument is more extreme still, because its logic does not depend on the entry of a universal injunction. Justice Jackson appears to believe that the reasoning behind any court order demands universal adherence, at least when the executive is concerned. In her law-declaring vision of the judicial function, a district court's opinion is not just persuasive, but has the legal force of a judgment. Once a single district court deems executive conduct unlawful, it is stated what the law requires, and the executive must conform to that view, ceasing its enforcement of the law against anyone, anywhere. And then they go into a footnote where they say the following. And think about this, what this position means. If a judge in the District of Alaska holds that a criminal statute is unconstitutional, can the United States prosecute a defendant under that statute in the District of Maryland? Perhaps Justice Jackson would instinctively say yes. It's hard to imagine anyone saying no. But why, on Justice Jackson's logic, does it not violate the rule of law for the executive to initiate a prosecution elsewhere? So do you see how that reads? She's saying, Justice Jackson in her dissent, that one district judge can shut down a law nationally based on one decision, not even issuing an injunction. And this is the kicker. This is the kicker. They don't even want to give the argument the time of day. We will not dwell on Justice Jackson's argument, which is at odds with more than 2 centuries worth of precedent, not to mention the Constitution itself. We observe only this. Justice Jackson decries an imperial executive while embracing an imperial judiciary. That's pretty hard-hitting stuff. No one disputes that the executive has a duty to follow the law, but the judiciary does not have unbridled authority to enforce this obligation. In fact, sometimes the law prohibits the judiciary from doing so. Observing the limits on judicial authority, including, as relevant here, the boundaries of the Judiciary Act of 1789, is required by a judge's oath to follow the law. I don't know what's happening. Is there a fire alarm going on? hear anything in the back there?
Yeah, we're fixing it.
Okay, so forgive the noise. They're fixing it. So what she's saying here, Justice Barrett, is that Justice Jackson may be asking lower court judges or suggesting they don't follow their oaths of office. Justice Jackson skips over that part, of course, before analyzing the governing statute involved, because analyzing the governing statute involves boring legalese. You know, she's a judge. So what Justice Jackson says, it's too technical to ask whether the law founding our federal judiciary outside the Supreme Court is too technical, boring legalese. I mean, that's not what judges are supposed to do. They're paid to do the so-called boring legalese. It's the boring legalese that protects our civil liberties, Justice. It's the boring legalese that protects our republic, Justice. It's the boring legalese that ensures that we're not thrown in jail without due process, Justice. The boring legalese that protects our freedom of speech, Justice. The boring legalese that doesn't let judges lord over us contrary to the Constitution in a way that would lead to judicial tyranny and dictatorship. Justice Jackson says, because analyzing the governing statute involves boring legalese, she seeks an answer to a far more basic question of enormous practical significance. And quoting Jackson, may a federal court in the United States of America order the executive to follow the law? In other words, is it unnecessary to consider whether Congress has constrained the judiciary in other words, it is unnecessary to consider whether Congress has constrained the judiciary. What matters is how the judiciary may constrain the executive. Justice Jackson would do well to heed her own admonition. Everyone from the president on down is bound by the law, and that goes for judges too. That's pretty incredible language from one justice to another. This decision was signed on by Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Gorsuch, Justice Thomas, and Justice Alito. A repudiation like no other that I've seen of another justice's position on a matter of law or in a dissent in the court. It was shocking to read. And more importantly, it was shocking to know that a justice on the Supreme Court basically is encouraging judges to engage in a judicial coup against our constitutional republic by asserting authority over the president that has no basis in statute, precedent, 200 years of law, or the United States Constitution. And that's not me talking. It's 6 justices on the Supreme Court. So an important decision. And what are the consequences of it? Because what is the issue about why did the Trump administration go to the Supreme Court about this issue of universal injunctions? On the specific case, because you had judges immediately shutting down President Trump's desire to enforce the rule of law on birthright citizenship as he sees it, and I think fairly interprets it. And essentially this means that the efforts to curtail that have been really significantly set back, because there are other ways to challenge it under the law, as you might imagine, class action lawsuits, there are other methods to do it. But they're going to be imperfect, and it means essentially that his effort to enforce the rule of law on birthright citizenship will proceed apace with not significant opposition. As I said on this tweet here, today's Supreme Court opinion barring nationwide injunction ruled by judges makes it significantly more difficult for the left and allied anti-Trump courts to completely stop Trump's upholding the principle, and this is from his briefs, that the Constitution does not grant birthright citizenship to the children of aliens who are unlawfully present in the United States, or the children of aliens whose presence is lawful but temporary. So if you're not here legally, or you're just passing through and you have a kid, the kid doesn't become a U.S. citizen. And I think he's correctly interpreting the law there. And I think if the Supreme Court does its job well, there's a strong argument for them to uphold it, because it's going to be challenged on the merits eventually. It's going to get up there soon. But it also protects the president's prerogatives in a host of other areas where these universal injunctions have been issued, as I say, dozens of them practically speaking. And so Trump's efforts to reform government, control government, curtail waste, fraud, and abuse, defend our sovereignty, have advanced significantly as a result of this one decision. Does it mean we have lawlessness in the sense that the president can become a dictator, either President Trump or any president after him, and the judges have no way, or courts have no way, to constrain unlawful behavior by executive agencies? No, that's not what's happening. What it means is that the way to curtail power, abuses of power by a president, unlawful activity by a president, are constrained by the rule of law. Meaning the court can do certain things to constrain, but they don't have the right to run the country from the courtroom. Just as Congress can do certain things to constrain a president, they don't have the right to run the executive branch from Capitol Hill. Just as the president picks judges, and the president can have prerogatives in terms of enforcing the rule of law as chief executive, it doesn't give him the right to run the legislature or make judicial decisions. That's what separation of powers is about. It doesn't eliminate abuse of power. It curtails it through checks and balances, imperfect as it may be. And of course, you know, it's tempting if you're a conservative, sometimes you don't like a decision made by a Biden person, you know, someone like Joe Biden or Obama or whatever, and you want the courts to shut it all down. Well, you know, that's not available in large measure anymore. It's happened a few times to Biden and Obama, and we've celebrated it. In terms of the illegal conduct, as conservatives have seen it being shut down. But the process had gotten out of control. And of course, the few times that it was invoked successfully, universal injunctions, in a way to constrain government power and abuse by Obama and Biden, pale in comparison to what's been going on with Trump. Trump's trying to actually restrict government power, do what the government's supposed to do in terms of defending the country by defending our sovereignty and removing illegal aliens, and of course the judges go crazy. And hopefully it'll be a little bit crazy, or a little bit less crazy now, thanks to the Supreme Court ruling. But lawyers being lawyers, and judges are lawyers, they'll think of ways to try to get around it, but I think it's going to be difficult to do. And as I said, a big victory for President Trump. Two other big decisions this week from the Supreme Court relate to a decision out of Maryland. It was Montgomery County. Judicial Watch has been investigating this issue for some time as well, exposing it. The Maryland public schools up there were forcing parents, or not allowing parents to opt out of, not have their children opt out of lessons concerning LGBTQT, what is it called? LGBTQI plus? Because the letters keep changing, right? So very somewhat offensive material if you have traditional religious beliefs. They didn't care. And so they could have their children being engaged in sex talk with adult employees of the schools, teachers, government employees, or other inappropriate material shared with them through these books that promoted these radical extremist positions on matters of sexual identity and, all the controversies around that. And they said parents couldn't pull their kids out, and the court said, of course they can. So it's a great victory for the rights of parents. And of course, the left is interested in grooming children, so they're disappointed that they can't engage in sex talk without parental permission in our public schools. Because that's what it comes down to. And there was another great decision as well, one upholding the rights of states to remove at least one portion of the public spigot that Planned Parenthood, one of the biggest promoters of abortion in the country, they've killed more unborn babies than any other single organization. What South Carolina said is that we don't want to have anything to do with Planned Parenthood. They kill babies, and as a result, they can't be part of the approved providers that gets Medicaid. Yeah, I know they get the Medicaid for other health services, but we want no part of an organization that kills unborn children as a matter of law. And the Supreme Court said that's fine. So it's a great victory for states' rights. It's a great victory for the life issue generally. And, Planned Parenthood is a truly evil organization in terms of its impact on our nation. It's partisan, which I guess is their right. But I don't know. Should partisan organizations get taxpayer money because they're engaged in some other good activities here and there? I don't believe so. So another good decision out of the Supreme Court in that regard. So the term is over. Now, the biggest news from the term from Judicial Watch was the court decided to take up a Judicial Watch lawsuit that was dismissed on account of standing. Our client, Congressman Mike Bost of Illinois, challenged an Illinois law that allowed the counting of ballots that arrive after Election Day for up to 14 days. So you could have a ballot arrive for up to 14 days after Election Day and it would still be counted. Even though federal law says we have an election day, not an election month or 2 weeks. And rather than address the merits, the court said, no, he has no standing, which is absurd. Of course, a candidate has standing, in our view, to challenge the illicit counting of ballots that's contrary to federal law. And the Supreme Court thought, well, we want to examine this issue on our own. So they're going to be hearing this case, as best we can tell, next term at, I guess, October, November, probably November. But a big victory, because the issue of whether candidates, in a federal campaign at least, can get into court to challenge election administration that may be illegal under federal law, the counting of ballots in this instance, that's a key issue. I mean, who can go to court to try to stop an election from being ruined or stolen or compromised or otherwise harmed? And the Supreme Court could be ruling on it thanks to Judicial Watch pursuing this case below and getting what cert granted. So great news there. So as we watch the Supreme Court, as we watch the courts, we also go into court repeatedly on your behalf, not only for election integrity, but for transparency and accountability. And one of the biggest accountability issues that's still out there is the lawfare against President Trump and the effort to jail him, the illicit targeting of his allies that continues to this day. And Judicial Watch has been front and center almost for a decade now in pursuing these issues. against the deep state, exposing the corrupt lawlessness, lawfare, weaponization, and targeting Trump. And we're doing it again with yet another lawsuit. This one against the Justice Department. And what is the issue? FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, that allows essentially the secret spying on American citizens. And under law, it can happen. But because it's a secretive process, obviously, if they're spying on you as it relates to foreign intelligence surveillance, you don't know, nor does anyone else. And that's why there are special restrictions in place and court oversight to curtail or try to curtail abuse. And FISA was abused and weaponized against Trump once before, specifically through the targeting of Carter Page, who worked on his campaign. So you target someone close to someone like Trump through the secret surveillance, and you're able to get access to all sorts of additional information based on that initial spying operation. And Judicial Watch exposed and obtained records of those specific FISA warrant applications that were so dishonestly, not only dishonestly, but so dishonest as to be criminal. Those applications that were used to get the spy warrants on Trump. Judicial Watch obtained those warrants back in, what year was it? Let me go back to the, let's see, take a look at my press release here. 2018, a Judicial Watch FOIA lawsuit forced the release of the FISA warrant application targeting Carter Page, who had been a Trump campaign advisor. That was the first time in history that such FISA warrants or records were released. And then we found out later that the Justice Department, we forced the Justice Department to admit, because we were asking for records of the court hearings that they had, that the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, that's supposed to be running, making sure there are no abuses, held no hearings on the FISA spy warrants. There were 4 targeting the president. And when you look at the warrants, there was no doubt it was about President Trump. And the judges who were running the court at the time, maybe it was one judge, maybe more than one, I forget now, never thought to call in the government lawyer and say, what's going on here? You've been looking at Trump for months and months and months, and you keep on asking to re-up these spy warrants. Are you finding anything? And of course they weren't. The spy warrants were evidence of a crime. They were never sufficiently pursued by anyone in the government, including Bull Durham, John Durham. So I'm still mad about that. So that's my long way of saying that they spied on Trump once before. I have no doubt they're doing it again. I have no doubt they did it again. I hope they're not doing it, but who knows, given the way the deep state works. I just presume the worst. You should too, based on the experience that we've been through already with the weaponization of government agencies to wage lawfare and spy operations against Trump. And so what we did was we asked the Department of Justice for any records, and I'll give you the specifics here. You can go and look at it on our website. Copies of proposed and or final subpoenas, warrants, court orders, including but not limited to any grand jury, state or federal court, FISA or FISC, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, or other authorizations obtained to surveil Donald Trump or any other person or entity in any investigation where Donald Trump was the target of the investigations from January 20th, 2021 through January 2025. So we want to know if the Biden gang was spying on Trump. And we asked for the records, and we didn't get any feedback. I want to see what they specifically said here. This is one of the nice things about having access to the computer here. I can kind of answer sometimes my own questions without having to confuse my colleagues in the back to get answers. So we filed the letter on May 30th, my birthday, This is classic. In the aforementioned, let's see. Now, we filed the request on May 2nd. By letter dated May 30th, the Justice Department's Office of Information Policy acknowledged receiving our request and notified us that the plaintiff's request falls within unusual circumstances based on a need to search in or seek consultation with another office. And therefore, they needed to extend the time limit to respond to our request. So we asked for records about Joe Biden's essentially spying on Trump. And the Justice Department said, unusual circumstances, we need more time. But as of the date of the complaint, we gave them the time. We don't always just sue out of the box. I mean, there's a deadline. So more or less, they got to respond within 20 days. Once you file a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information request. And they can grant themselves some extra time, like 10 days sometimes. So let's say a month, more or less. Now, do we always sue on day 21 or day 31, depending on the administrative issues? No. So my point is, we give them a little time. We recognize that even though technically they're out of compliance with the law, sometimes it takes the government a long time to get back to you, even if their desire is to be transparent. So we gave them plenty of time, and this is the Trump Justice Department. Pam Bondi. I would think that Kash Patel's FBI was involved in this as well. And they haven't given us anything. And that's why we sued. I have zero doubt and every reason to believe that the Biden gang was spying on Trump and his team. The Justice Department should follow federal FOIA law and release all documents about such abuse as soon as possible. And I encourage you to go back, and the best way to gain a good understanding of this is to take a look at Judicial Watch's books. Most recently, our book, Rights and Freedoms in Peril. And prior to that, it was Republic Under Assault. There are no other. You don't need to read any other books than Judicial Watch's books than to get the details of the corruption I'm talking about. But our work on exposing the prior FISA abuses of Trump, I'm convinced that if we hadn't been around asking tough questions and blowing the whistle, Trump would have been put in jail, either impeached or put in jail. I mean, removed in addition to being impeached, right? Impeachment is by the House, removal is after trial by the Senate. And we've been targeting as well and exposing the abuses targeting Trump by the Biden administration. I'm convinced they're spying. I mean, they raided his home. They raided the man's home on a pretext. Do you think they're above spying on him secretly? Of course not. Of course not. And we forced out the scam of a warrant that they used to raid his home. We've targeted for exposing the operations of Jack Smith, who was working for him. Who was working for Jack Smith? They're still hiding that. I think the Trump administration is figuring out whether they want to keep on hiding that information. We sued in just a few months ago the DOJ for any details of investigations, inquiries, or referrals concerning potential misconduct by anyone working for Jack Smith. And of course, famously, we've been battling Fani Willis for her collusion records with the Justice Department and Congress, and she was playing games down there. The court found her to be in violation of the law and ordered her to pay us $22,000. So if there's any entity out there, including Congress, that's done more to expose the corrupt targeting of Trump, I don't know. I don't know of any. Judicial Watch has been doing so much of the heavy lifting in this regard, and we are not going to slow down one bit. Now, I wish the Justice Department was doing this work, just exposing it proactively, or even better, responding to our darn FOIAs as the law requires. Is it too much to ask that they treat our FOIAs with respect? I don't think it is. And you can, and you know, when it comes to the abuses targeting Trump and people around him, it's not limited to the Justice Department. It's not limited to the FBI. The question is which agencies weren't involved. The State Department was also part of the abusing of President Trump. Judicial Watch exposed that. You wouldn't believe what they were doing to target Trump and people around him, even while he was in office, meaning his own State Department. The Obama State Department did it. The State Department under Trump, the deep staters targeted Trump. And then Marco Rubio disclosed a few weeks ago during an April 30th, 2025 cabinet meeting, Rubio said, "We had an office in the Department of State whose job it was to censor Americans." He also said that the State Department labeled a member of President Trump's cabinet as a purveyor of disinformation, compiling a dossier of social media posts from the unnamed cabinet member. Rubio says State had dossier accusing Trump member, oh, that's the reference. And so we asked for records not only about that, but about whoever else they were targeting. And of course, we've been getting the runaround. So I like Marco Rubio. I think he's generally doing a good job for President Trump, but on this transparency stuff, he's got to get his act together. There's the headline, Judicial Watch sues State Department for records labeling President Trump and cabinet officials as disinformation purveyors. Of course, in the State Department, there was this agency, as Bill Huizenga, a member of Congress, Republican from Michigan. He referenced the Global Engagement Center as an entity that was initially authorized for the statutory purpose of countering foreign propaganda and disinformation efforts. Despite that mandate, for years, the agency instead deployed its shadowy network of grantees and sub-grantees to facilitate the censorship of American voices. So we know what was going on generally there. And of course, Judicial Watch has done so much in way of exposing not only what the State Department was up to, but other agencies. But specifically targeting senior people in Trump's orbit, and I guarantee you Trump was on that targeting list, raises significant legal, as far as I'm concerned, civil liability issues for those who did it, and there should be criminal liability for those who did it if the law applies as I think it does. The Biden administration's operation, the censorship operation, was compiling files on his political enemies from Trump world. I think that's what Rubio is implying here. The State Department should immediately disclose the records about this abuse as FOIA requires. So FOIA requires the disclosure of the records we're asking for, and we want them disclosed under law. And we're asking this of Marco Rubio's State Department. This is not the first time obviously I have to tell you, we're in battles with dozens of government agencies through dozens of lawsuits. But, we've had this particular battle with the State Department over USAID secrets, where the Biden people were giving money to aid relief in Gaza, and we can't get information about the key grantees that were benefiting from millions of dollars of taxpayer money that was probably going to help fronts associated with Hamas terrorists. I don't know why else they would withhold the information from us. And now on top of that, we're fighting the Secretary of State's agency in court for information about who they were spying on and compiling an info on and a dossier on. And where did we get the information? From Marco Rubio. It's the only reason we asked for the documents. He makes an announcement on national television at a cabinet meeting covered worldwide, probably, right? That his agency was creating files on one of his colleagues in the cabinet. And so we said, well, give us the details. And they don't want to give us the details. Come on. So our work on censorship, now the censorship of Americans by the deep state, and I think it began in earnest in 2020. COVID was used by the deep state, and then the elections were used by the deep state as excuses to censor American citizens. And it metastasized in ways that no, I think, American could have imagined during the Biden administration. So tens of millions of Americans had their First Amendment rights suppressed, censored, abused, harmed under the color of law, under the abuse of authority by government officials at the state and federal levels. And Judicial Watch has been, again, second to none in exposing the details of that. In fact, we have a petition before the Supreme Court that's still being litigated. We're asking the Supreme Court to look at state of California causing YouTube to take down a video featuring me talking about, on behalf of Judicial Watch, this very weekly update, election issues in California. And we've exposed how the Department of Homeland Security was heavily involved in this corruption and censorship, document after document. And yours truly has been targeted by every leftist involved in this issue for censorship. I've been blocked from Twitter. TikTok took me down. The Chinese communists acted like the American communists, right? And censoring me. And of course, Judicial Watch is targeted as well. I'm not so naive as to think that they're targeting me because they don't like me personally. It's because they don't like what I'm saying as it relates to Judicial Watch's activities, blowing the whistle on government corruption and abuse. So Judicial Watch is high up on the list, but obviously no higher than President Trump. There's no one who's been more censored than he has. And the State Department that his appointees are running are giving us the runaround about the targeting of Trump and people in Trump world. So I hope that changes. I mean, we just had to sue the FBI last week because, no, we weren't suing. We have a lawsuit, but we were in court against the FBI and Justice Department last week because they're hiding information about the Biden FBI censoring Americans through working with Twitter. Not good, I tell you, not good. So we had a we had a mayoral primary up in New York this week. And they, we don't know what the final results are because of ranked choice voting, which in my view is an abomination. I think ranked choice, well, maybe I had it. Do we have the tweet on ranked choice voting here?
20.
Number 20. Yeah, that's something else. So ranked choice voting, I can't explain it, which tells you that we shouldn't have it. I'm going to be blunt. It's a confusing way to vote. Essentially, you rank your votes, and depending on who gets the least votes, and if you're lucky enough to have chosen the right second or third or fourth vote on the list in terms of your ranking, you might have your vote moved around and given to someone else subsequent. And to describe it is to condemn it as confusing. It allows, essentially, in my view, people to get more than one vote in one election. If you pick right and guess right, you get to kind of stay around for round 2 and 3 as they divvy up the votes, as people have their lower ranked choices moved, either eliminated or allocated. And many people get their ballots eliminated immediately and don't get their votes because they didn't vote initially for one particular person or the wrong group of people. They get immediately eliminated. I mean, let's say they're confused. Let's say you come in and say, I just want to vote for one person for the primary. Why do I have to list all these other people in my order of preference? I don't even know what that means. It's like I can't calculate. I can't even play checkers. How am I going to figure out what happens if I vote this person in rank number 3 versus rank number 2? And the left loves it, right? Because what I think the left wants to do is leverage ranked choice voting choices by they want to have their leftist allies put on the ballot and get votes that they again can allocate as they, up the chain to hopefully further their leftist candidate, further other leftist candidates. That's why they like ranked choice voting. Does it mean it's unconstitutional? Not because that's the reason they want to do it. I think it's unconstitutional because it allows people to vote more than once, practically speaking, or have their votes counted or weighed more heavily in a way that undermines what I thought was the constitutional principle of one person, one vote as delineated by the Supreme Court. And you see why they like it, because they've got as the putative winner of the primary, because it takes weeks to figure out who won under ranked choice voting. I don't know, if a literacy test is prohibited, typically speaking, in order to vote, ranked choice voting is much more difficult to understand than learning how to read. As I said, you can be a pretty sophisticated voter and still not know how ranked choice voting works. So, no literacy tests, no ranked choice voting. That's my thinking. Now, and I think without saying you should vote for or against anyone, there's a candidate now at the primary level who is likely to be the Democratic primary person, primary candidate for mayor, who is a terrorist supporter. He's been a citizen for, 4 or 5 years, not even, probably just 4 years. He supports terrorism. He's a communist, a self-avowed democratic socialist. I mean, look at this statement he makes. It shows you the extremism.
Oftentimes
Turn on the video or the audio. Can you hear it?
Oftentimes we've even found as legislators, when we go into these courts, the term violent crime is even used when people are stealing packages. Violent crime is even used when people are accused of burglary and there happens to be a housing unit in that same dwelling. So violence is an artificial construction. And we have to be very clear that what is happening here with these district attorneys, that is violence. That is violence of the highest degree. We have oftentimes we've even found.
So that's what you're hearing there is a communist revolutionary. And what's interesting is, if you support terrorism, He says he supports a global intifada. He pretends that intifada doesn't mean what it means. He was supportive and promoting protests targeting Jews, promoting Hamas's talking points and Hamas-style terrorism, defending the indefensible, literally promoting communism on his tweet feed. And it's problematic for him legally and potentially as a citizen, recently naturalized, for him to have done so, because you can be denaturalized as a foreign national or a former foreign national if you are found to have been misleading in your affiliations, desires, etc., when you became a citizen. So he could be subject, in theory, to an investigation for denaturalization based on his extremism in support of communism, terrorism, etc. I mean, I'm exploring the issue. I don't know if he should be subject to investigation, but it's no laughing matter. It's no laughing matter. And I don't know about you, but if you support terrorism, there ought to be generally some type of investigation. You don't have a First Amendment right to support terrorism. You don't. And to call on the mass murder, call effectively for the mass murder of people you don't like. Especially if you're someone who just became a citizen. It raises questions about whether you pulled a fast one in order to become a citizen. And that's why there are these denaturalization procedures in place for such situations. And I don't know if the Justice Department, or I don't know which responsible agency, maybe the U.S. Citizens and Immigration, USCIS, Citizen and Immigration Services, right? Will launch an investigation. But it's worth thinking about and examining what the law is, his statements, his conduct, his background, because it's troubling. To have someone recently be naturalized as a citizen promoting terrorism, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's not supposed to happen. So put that in your pipe and smoke it, New Yorkers. And this isn't because he's a candidate. New York's going to, New York voters are going to decide whether they want him to be mayor or not. I mean, this is a rule of law issue that's kind of been being highlighted on a national level. And the question is the rule of law going to be enforced as it relates to naturalization against this prominent figure who seems to abuse the rule of law and may have done things that warrant investigation? And I don't think he should be immune from investigation just because he's running for mayor. Frankly, the fact he's running for mayor makes it all the more important that there be a serious consideration of whether he's followed the rule of law on immigration. You agree? If you do, share your thoughts below. Maybe you don't agree. This is what I love about Judicial Watch. So you hear me, if you've watched in recent weeks, complain about the fact that no one's been doing much, as I can tell, targeting the lawfare around Trump, trying to figure out what went on, doing prosecutions and such. But I don't just complain. Judicial Watch doesn't complain and do nothing else. We are in court litigating on the very issues we're concerned about. I've highlighted 2 federal lawsuits just now on the issue of the targeting illicitly of President Trump by State Department goons in the deep state and potentially the Justice Department and the FBI spying on him. And not only are we worried about it, but when we get the runaround, when we ask questions about it, we're willing to go to federal court on it. And similarly, the targeting, the lawfare, the grand conspiracy against Trump isn't just here in Washington, D.C. We're convinced, and we know, based on the evidence we've uncovered, that includes other states, New York, targeting of Trump there, infamously, with Letitia James and the leftist judges up in New York, unethical judges. And then we have what went on in Fulton County. President Trump's still under indictment. He's still under indictment in Georgia in retaliation for him upholding the rule of law on elections and asking questions about the way the Georgia election was run. And there are all sorts of people under indictment, including my colleague still. I don't know if she's still technically under indictment because she had a successful court ruling, Christina Bobb, in Arizona. But the Attorney General of Arizona is giving us the runaround about the collusion with the Justice Department. And specifically, we asked her for records about any communications. Here, I'm going to quote from the lawsuit. Let me go back to the lawsuit. I can show you what we're talking about. Judicial Watch sues for collusion documents of Arizona Democratic Attorney General and Jack Smith operation. So we filed the lawsuit. It's a state court lawsuit, so we're not just suing in federal court. We're suing in state courts to expose the corruption targeting Trump. On January 13th, 2025, several media outlets reported that Attorney General Mays, I think it's Mays, am I pronouncing her name correctly? Chris Mays, had formally requested case documents from the U.S. Department of Justice Special Counsel Jack Smith's criminal investigation into President Donald Trump regarding the 2020 presidential election. And then we quote a news report that says that she said the documents could ensure defendants in Arizona's fake electors case would be held accountable. There were no fake electors. There were alternative electors, which has been done since the beginning of our country in many respects, that were considered and put off to the side in case election challenges succeeded. You can't challenge electors without having electors of your own to sub in. That's what was going on. It happened all the time. Specifically in 1960, Kennedy's operation in Hawaii did it. So the litigation and the lawsuit and the abuse of citizens in Arizona for doing what they're able to do under federal state law and the Constitution is outrageous, truly outrageous. And like Fani Willis, we asked for records of Chris Mays of her communications with the Biden gang, and we've been getting the hand to the face again, and that's why we just sued in court. Any communications and or documents with Jack Smith and the DOJ Special Counsel. Collusion against President Trump by Democratic politicians with Jack Smith and the weaponized Biden Justice Department are of great public interest, I'd say, huh? Attorney General Mays is acting as if she has something to hide. We've got several lawsuits against, as I said earlier, the abuses targeting Trump, against the Justice Department, Fani Willis, etc. Keep on calling her Fani. I think she calls herself Fani. But yet another lawsuit by Judicial Watch, again, doing the heavy lifting that seemingly our Justice Department isn't doing much of. If they are, they're keeping it's the biggest secret in American history. They're doing a serious investigation of what went on there. So hopefully they follow our lead, right? Judicial Watch and Tom Fitton hasn't forgotten about the fact that these people tried to rig an election by trying to put Trump in jail. Maybe we should spend some time investigating them. Hauling them before a grand jury for trying to rig an election. Hauling them before a grand jury for violating the civil rights of President Trump and dozens of other American citizens under color of law. Haul them before a grand jury for colluding and conspiring with state elected prosecutors, Democratic politicians, and corrupt members of Congress to target American citizens in retaliation for exercising their First Amendment rights. Call them before a grand jury for trying to put someone in jail for simply running against Joe Biden. Call them before a grand jury for trying to put someone in jail for simply exercising their core constitutional freedoms under the First Amendment and under federal and state law to dispute an election. Call them before a grand jury for censoring us for raising questions about an election. If there's a comparable, abusive, widespread violation of civil rights that go to the heart of our constitutional republic in American history, I don't know of it. So the Justice Department doesn't seem to be doing much, but your Judicial Watch is over target. And we only do it with your support. I encourage you to go to judicialwatch.org. Give us your best possible donation. And as far as I'm concerned, on matters like this, we're just beginning. I'll see you here next time on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.